welcome to this lunchtime live, but of course it's 10 o'clock on a Monday morning. So welcome to this morning live from Leeds Fashion Futures, which of course is Zero Waste Leeds' project with the RSA, looking at how we can have a more sustainable approach to fashion on a city level, what we need to do to make that happen. I'm Peg Alexander, local journalist and presenter. Now, this week, and I guess today, we are launching Leeds Fashion Futures Week. It's going to be a week of events during which we're going to look at this question from various different perspectives, looking at our history and legacy to the world when it comes to textiles, looking at our skills and resources, and also how we can better value our clothes. But on to today. Well, our guests today are Josie Warden and Nat Ortiz from the RSA. The RSA, through their Regenerative Futures project, are working with Zero Waste Leeds on Leeds Fashion Futures. Together, they've been exploring how a place-based approach can be helpful in looking at how we can create a more sustainable circular economy to clothing and fashion. So today we're going to talk about the project so far, how the themes have come about, how exploring Leeds' rich heritage around clothing and textiles can help us imagine a different future. As always, we're also joined by one of the Zero Waste Leeds team. This morning we've got Rob Greenland with us as well, and we are live, we're monitoring comments, so please, if you are watching live, please do join us, put your comments in. I'll keep an eye on those, we'll bring them into the conversation. Say what you want to say, ask questions, input thoughts and ideas, and welcome to anyone who's watching the replay afterwards. So Josie and Nat, do you know what, I think we should start like Julie Andrews says, right? Let's start at the very beginning because it's a very good place to start. So RSA, actually, I mean, I always think of it, the Royal Society of Arts and Manufacturing, but tell us a bit about kind of who you are and what you're doing. And what on earth you're doing up in Leeds, trying to help us sort out our fashion future.
Sure, great, Peg, and it's really great to be with you this morning. So Nat and I both work in the design team at the RSA. And so, as you said, the RSA, our full title is the Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts, Manufactures and Commerce, which is a bit of a mouthful, and we're a very old organisation, so about 260 years old now, and have always been interested in how innovation from lots of different people can help change society. So today that means that we try to unite people with new ideas to think about how we can solve some of the big challenges of our time. So we're really interested in how lots of people and lots of communities can be involved in making change, and we think that's the kind of best way of making change in the future and making societies and economies that work for everyone. So we work in the design team, and we're really interested in the role of design, both how you actually, the design of things, so that might be of clothing or of transport or buildings, but also how design as an approach can be really helpful. So how we can think about using design to help us solve problems in society and in the environment as well. So that's how we kind of got interested in working in fashion, because it has such an enormous social and environmental footprint and problems throughout the world. So we're exploring how fashion can make change in society, and that's
and obviously us lot up in here in Leeds, Leeds is the greatest city in the world anyway, so we don't need any encouragement. You know what, don't laugh, because you know we're all serious when we say that. We don't need any encouragement to say that that Leeds should absolutely be the centre of this work, but kind of how did you get involved?
So we were thinking about, fashion is really problematic. We need to change the way we make stuff, the way we use stuff. And actually at the moment, a lot of the stuff happens, we know that a lot of stuff in fashion is made abroad. It's not made in the UK as much anymore. But we were thinking, actually, if we have to have a really different system and different ways of doing it, what would it look like in the UK? And when we started thinking about, I think the obvious place to start was somewhere like Leeds, which has been an innovator in fashion and textiles for centuries and has been absolutely at the kind of forefront of those changes. So when we asked the question about what should the future look like, then I think Leeds was the obvious place to start. And that's when we made the connection with Rob as well, who's a fellow of the RSA, and started having just a really exciting conversation about what this could look like in Leeds, and the role that Leeds could play in changing the future of fashion.
It turns out you're Twitter habit, Rob.
I know.
He's landed in the right place.
Yeah, it's quite interesting though, because I mean, I think that's an important part of the story, really. That we, I suppose, I mean, as people will know, we kind of look at various kind of issues around kind of waste reduction, and fashion and clothing is one that we've been interested in for a while, because it is a really important kind of, kind of theme where we can, each of us kind of can make some practical changes to how we clothe ourselves, basically, and what we do with our clothing. But we'd been doing some work on a zero waste fashion project for kind of around 12 months before we had a chat with the RSA, looking again particularly at the kind of practical things we can do, around reducing our impacts. And yet it did come from a Twitter conversation, I think, with Josie at the start, really, that people might say that sometimes I waste my time kind of on social media, but actually there's a I will very much stick up for the kind of for the real kind of positives of social media as well. And I think it was again, I mean, as Josie mentioned, there's been the kind of Regenerative Futures project that this kind of sits within, and I think Josie just had written something about that, and I thought just felt like there was some kind of quite interesting kind of links there, and I think they picked up straight away about the kind of heritage of the city, but also hopefully trying to use that as a starting point for conversations, really, not just looking back and saying, oh, wasn't that all really interesting? We're kind of looking back and thinking, well, that was interesting. What does it say to us today, and what does it say to us for the future? So yeah, so it did. Yeah, that was a bit of the starting point, really.
Now, you had a group of us do an amazing exercise. I mean, it was maybe about 3-4 weeks ago, something like that, where there was a group, because there's a whole group of activists and people who were really interested in making this happen, being pulled together by Zero Waste Leeds as part of this project. You got us all to do a kind of imagination exercise, didn't you, about 50 years ago and then 50 years in the future?
Yeah, definitely. I think, well, one of the principles that we wanted to bring forward to this project was around imagination and creativity, and asking people and communities to participate and be able to put forward their hopes and aspirations and dreams and ideas of what could the future look like. So we kind of came together on Zoom and created a vision. So we looked a little bit at the past and thought about how many things have changed over the past 50 years in Leeds. We took a walk around Leeds and tried to visualize what it was like. Then we came back to right now, to the present, to then be able to cast forward and really tap into that imagination to map together a vision for what the future of fashion in Leeds could look like. And it was a really interesting exercise, because lots of really good ideas came up. Yeah, it was very inspiring to see all of the themes and ideas that came up about how the people who were involved in this exercise wanted Leeds to feel like, wanted the place to be like, but also in a kind of more tangible way, wanted fashion to be like in the future. Yeah. We think it's really important to look at the future in order, although it feels sometimes utopian, and it feels some people share this idea of oh, maybe we're kind of dreaming too much. Is it really going to be like that? And we cannot say, but it's important to come together with a joint vision to then be able to say, okay, well, that is a North Star, and that's where we would like, how we would like things to be, and what can we do, where can we act right now that kind of take us a little bit closer to that vision.
Just to say, we've got a few people watching now. Do join in the discussion. Come on, put your ideas down. If anything's coming to your mind, especially about what you would like Leeds to look like in 50 years time, get it in the chat and tell us that. And if you're watching on the replay as well, please do that as well, because we'll be monitoring all those comments. When you were saying, in our minds, we took a walk down Briggate, I think it was, didn't we, in 50 years ago, and then we took a walk in 50 years time, and it was really interesting about kind of what we want to see, and thinking about the difference of where Leeds has gotten for 50 years. And it was much easier task for me to do the imagining what it was like walking down Briggate 50 years ago, because Rob, one of the things that sort of started our conversation, I mean, this must have been a good year and a half, 2 years, and again, this was on Twitter, to be fair, it was on Twitter, was when someone at the BBC unearthed an old documentary that my father had made in 1972, so we are talking pretty much 50 years ago, about Leeds and about its developments. And in fact, first we were talking about it in terms of transport and housing, weren't we? Because it, you know, so much of what it raised in there hasn't been sorted in the city, but obviously at the heart of it was the textile history. And there's a clip of Dad walking down Briggate in 1972. So if any of you want to actually see what it's like, just Google in search of the city Patrick Nutchins and you'll find it. But that, I think, does give us kind of really interesting stuff, because what for me is so telling is that some ways you watch it, so much has changed, and in other ways hardly anything's changed, you know, at the same time. So thinking 50 years in the future, you know, the potential, you know, in 1972, the idea that we'd have designed the stores on Briggate, right, and the whole kind of Knightsbridge of the North thing, whatever, you know, was just completely fanciful. But to think, so some of those things will be quite similar maybe when we come out of the pandemic in 50 years time, but also some of the things that we might think might be quite fanciful about how we can lead the way and really make a change for a proper sustainable fashion future maybe aren't that fanciful.
Yeah, and again, I think that is as you say, that kind of 50-year kind of time frame is quite interesting, isn't it? And I think looking back, as you say, probably 50 years before your dad made that that film as well. I mean, it's been really interesting for me to look back at some of the history of Leeds and textiles and clothing, and some of which I knew a little bit about. You know, Montague Burton is a name that you're bound to have heard of, but again, it's really interesting to just see how central kind of clothing, and particularly the kind of manufacture of clothing and tailoring was to the development of Leeds as a city. But also, and you know, your dad picks that up in that film about how, you know, mass manufacture basically was the thing that was a driver behind city centres, if you like. Do you know what I mean? That was the kind of thing that moved.
Well, that's the thing I didn't realise before watching it, was actually that how much what Leeds did has defined city centres for good and bad across the whole country and the world. Is define the concept of the city centre in a mass manufacturing world, and particularly around pedestrianisation and around where you put shops and, you know, all of that. We just sort of take it for granted, but that's one of the things that's so interesting. If we did that, we can lead the way in terms of thinking much more about the circular economy on clothing. Josie, talk to us a little bit about that kind of whole concept. And, you know, because at the moment, I think for lots of people, it'd be hard to imagine clothing any other way than it is at the moment, that you've got, well, I don't want to say, but you've got Prime Arnie on one hand, and then we've got, you know, Harvey Nicks and all the designer stores on the other.
Yeah, I think that's it. When you look at the history, you realise that actually the kind of what fashion is like at the moment has actually only existed for a really short amount of time. That idea of like the very kind of high volume fast fashion stuff is really only sort of 20 years old. We didn't used to work like that, and so we have got this approach now where it's around speed and volume and cheapness, but also we're lacking kind of quality in what's being made, and we have really big problems with fashion from the kind of the problems it causes. So from water pollution, air, soil pollution, huge amounts of waste, and also really big impacts on the climate. So fashion is produces 10% of the world's carbon emissions, which is enormous for one sector, and uses a huge amount of the world's synthetic fibres, which are derived from fossil fuels as well. It's kind of the third biggest user of those behind packaging and transport. So it's a huge problem in the system at the moment. And so there's a lot of conversations in the fashion industry about really needing to move to a very different approach. So rather than what we have at the moment, which is we basically take stuff out of the ground, we make it into stuff, and then we throw it away and assume that it kind of just goes somewhere, into a system which is much more about actually how can we keep these resources in use, make things last for longer, be used differently. So we're thinking about kind of repair and caring for our clothing a lot more than we are at the moment, thinking of second hand, maybe sharing or rental. So models that are quite different to the current high street. And it's really interesting, I think, when you bring it back to a place like Leeds, where actually the high street and that kind of culture that's built around the high street is really based on this current mode of production. So if we want to change that, actually it's our places that could look really different. I think that's why the kind of this place-based approach is so interesting, because although fashion can feel like at the moment a lot of it happens somewhere else, actually the way it changes us and the way the things that we can do to change it in the future will like live around us in our communities. And as you say, if Leeds has had this kind of heritage of actually being a front runner in this change, how can it now? And moving away, I think, sometimes from the idea that if we look at heritage, it's about like, oh, isn't it a shame that's not how things are done anymore? And oh, well, it's not like that, into actually what is the like essence of what a place can offer, and thinking about how that can then move forward into the future. So I think there's so much potential in the city, in Leeds and in other cities in the UK that have had this textile manufacturing and production history, to think, actually, how do we become part of that future, which is much more about things happening locally, looking at smaller scale production, a lot more reuse, sharing, repair activities, and how can they help our communities to develop as well? How can they be good for local economies and good for local people?
Yeah, I think that thing that you've just raised there about this is relatively recent is really important, because for loads of us in Leeds, probably we might look and go, can't imagine, well, we're having to think about it because of the pandemic, but can't imagine the city without this glitzy shopping city centre, you know, with all these high-end stores, and but that's the basis of our economy, which, let's face it, compared to other cities, we know Leeds has the largest economy, or did have outside of London, the Leeds city, that actually the economy's done, you know, in some measures has done incredibly well in Leeds. So lots of people looking and saying, you know, how do we have something that's different, that's not based on all of that? And it's so important to remember that actually that is really recent. And I know we keep coming back to it, and this won't mean anything to the three of you, but when I grew up in Leeds, the idea that the city centre would be like it is, you know, was just kind of really quite ridiculous. I mean, actually going back to that thing about production, now I was a fashion student. I started off in Leeds and then ended up at London's top fashion college. And I remember I was on that course in 1987. And to my shame, I'm kind of a bit embarrassed to admit this, but I was permanently in trouble for wanting to design high street, really cheap stuff, right? They wanted me to design real proper haute couture, you know, really expensive stuff. This is a true story, actually. So my collection, my final collection, which was all in denims and cheap material, because I had no money, basically, so that's why I had to do it. You know, one of the teachers took it away and redesigned it in fur and silk and stuff. You know, whereas me, I was all just like cheap denims and whatever. But I remember talking to them at that point, going, there must be a market for really cheap stuff that sells at $5 a piece and can get out there really quickly. And in my head, I used to have this image. Now I'm actually admitting stuff I probably shouldn't do on here, but I used to have this image of, and it was always the store that was next opposite Boots, of Off the Peg would be this shop, and I would revolutionise fashion. With stuff that was dead trendy but dead cheap. And of course it never happened because I got waylaid by politics, as you do. But you know, I mean, and that was 1987, and I was told to not be so ridiculous. So things do change really, really fast, and they can change very, very fast. And now one of the things I think is interesting is if we think about a different kind of city centre, we can be talking about more jobs, can't we? Because we can be talking about repair, reuse, still in the city centre. It doesn't mean that that rethinking fashion has to mean the dead city centre.
No, it doesn't have to. You know, actually, in that vision that we co-created, actually city center was very much alive, and there were many spaces, you know, for people to interact. But however, the something that came through was a real importance of valuing independent makers, and and their creations. So Off the Peg probably would, will be
perfect. Yeah.
one of those popular ones. So independent makers, opportunities for students to set up their own ventures, to generate fair local employment. Something that came up as well was this idea of like clothing feeling unique and creative. So kind of, and the effect on the relationship that we have, that we can develop with our clothing, right? If we're able to customize it, if we're able to learn the skills in order to kind of develop a different relationship with our clothing, we might be able to keep them for longer, and we might be able to appreciate them more, and we might be able to then feel more encouraged to hand them down, etc., etc. So things that last longer, and trying to reduce that idea of like, I go and buy something, I didn't pay very much, I don't value, I throw it into the bin, and I don't care. So that was something that came up, and as Josie said, around the models of repairing and mending, and repairing, and again really tapping into that creativity and bringing back those skills, the skills that maybe we had in the past out of necessity. What's interesting, what could be our motivation to bring them back now, and that was part of the discussions that we've been having with people in Leeds.
We've got a great comment from Beth on Facebook, so I'll read out what she says, and then whoever wants to jump in, please do. Thanks, Beth, for this. She says, lovely to see you all virtually, which is very nice. Wish we could see you, but we can't. She says, this is really exciting and informative for me as a final year student studying textile design. As citizens and sustainable designers in Leeds, how do you think we can educate individuals that may not have any idea of the destroying effects of fast fashion? Do you think there will be a change through activism and education, or maybe through advertisements through the city of Leeds? So exciting.
It's a really good point. I mean, I think one thing that we've tried to do through Zero Waste Leeds is this idea of kind of movement building. So kind of trying to, basically, find the people in the city who are interested in these things and kind of work with them to change things. You know what I mean? And we've got over 15,000 people across our social media who kind of follow us, and we know that fashion has consistently been, the most engaged theme. Do you know what I mean? So I think in terms of how things change, I mean, it's a big question, isn't it? But I think kind of changing some of the kind of social norms around these things, I think that kind of matters. So more people who do, buy secondhand or learn new repair skills or whatever it might be. I think that kind of stuff kind of matters. And then I suppose the other thing that I think is important here that we've picked up a lot from working with the RSA is kind of building on what you might call the assets in the city already. Sometimes, and we can be guilty about this in our work sometimes, our work is often about trying to solve problems. So we see the problems. Whereas actually, I think one thing that's been really good in this project is to see the fantastic assets there are in the city already. Loads of people, textile students like Beth, for example, or people who are interested in this stuff, fabrication, who bring together loads of the kind of makers in the city. There are so many people and organizations out there who can and do play a part in creating this better future. Do you know what I mean? So it's not.
You've actually been blown away by the response, haven't you?
Amazing, honestly, because I mean that is, genuinely that is how we try to work. But this has been on a whole other level. Do you know what I mean? I think particularly because it's gone a little bit out of our normal waste comfort zone, if you like, to a much bigger kind of picture. But that's what's so interesting, that there's loads of people with tons of expertise, tons of enthusiasm, who know about this stuff and want it to be better. And I think, going back to the kind of place-based thing, a city is often the kind of, to me, kind of feels like the kind of the geography where you can, take some of these kind of concepts, if you like, and then actually make them real. So I think that's for me, that's a big part of why we feel very positive about this stuff.
What could we learn from elsewhere, Josie, about or Nat, about how in other with other issues about how we can do that, and how you bring people and educate people on board if they don't necessarily realise there's a problem in the first place.
Yeah, I think going back to the best question as well around the kind of educating people, it feels like there is so much movement happening now on fashion compared to, I also studied textiles. When I graduated 10 years ago, it was weird to want to work on sustainability. It was niche, it was unusual, the mainstream industry didn't want to listen. And I think consumers weren't as interested, and that has really changed. So I think there is that movement already. And I think what Rob was saying about actually building a movement in a place is so important to kind of create momentum, because individual people can want to make changes, but actually if when they go into their high street there aren't those options for them, or they don't know where to repair things or where to recycle things, then actually you're not going to get much, you can't get that much change. So it's thinking about how those individual actions can kind of come together as a network, and then kind of start building and pushing up those changes further up in the system as well. And I think that's what we see. So giving examples of like other areas, I think we've seen it a lot from food. The kind of there's a lot of commonality, I think, between the conversations about fashion and food. They're both things that are absolutely core to our day-to-day lives, clothing, food. But actually the food movement is a lot further ahead, I think, on how it's how you kind of help people to understand the challenges around the impacts of food, how you can really explore and enjoy the kind of local and production that can really support local communities, how you can make that provision accessible to people. Even the shifts we've seen in diets around, you know, veganism or vegetarianism, that again, that shift of like access for people has really changed. So I think there's a lot of parallels between food and fashion, and that we can learn from the kind of food movements about how we change this and kind of build movements and help people to get involved in this new way of doing stuff.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think one of the findings or things that we have kind of discovered through the project is that a lot of people in Leeds, an amazing amount of people, are really interested in the topic, which is very exciting. And there are incredible initiatives already, as Rob mentioned, happening in the city. And there's just this kind of need to bring them together, to collaborate a little bit more, because they all feel they can't do it all, they can't change it all, right? So how can they establish those relationships to collaborate and to strengthen each other, to then be able to move forward kind of together towards that vision of where the place wants to be. So that actually has been a really exciting part of this project, that some of the people in the initial phase of the project, where we were listening and kind of understanding what the challenges were, where the opportunities were, what the assets were, some of the people just said, these are really important things for me. I want to be part of this project, and I want to collaborate with others and make some things happen. And so we created these working groups that were set up out of just people's motivation and energy to work on the topic, to bring forward their ideas on what could those interventions look like, bringing designers perspective, and then bringing a kind of more communications perspective, and bring like different disciplines together. And that's what we're going to be actually launching and sharing a lot of this week. So stay tuned.
Tell us about the themes. Tell us about the different themes.
Yeah, there were 3 main themes on these working groups that we call them working groups, but we're not fixed on the names. And one was around skills and resources. So people that really wanted to bring up that education, as you mentioned, bring that up and make it available and easy to access and not intimidating. So that group is about that, and they're sharing ideas and videos around, simple things, practical things that you can do, and inspirational things as well. We are also sharing, we have increased the amount of initiatives that we are promoting through the Zero Waste Leeds map. So you'll be looking at lots of ventures and things that are happening already in the city. The other theme is around heritage. So it's looking at the past, thinking about that, learning about that, and then saying what do we want to take, what do we want to remember, what do we want to take, what do we want to acknowledge and value, and how can that help us move towards that vision of the future. And the other one is around valuing our clothes. That kind of brings both of those themes together as well.
Yeah, and Josie, we are going to be pulling this all together, aren't we, in a kind of story, and pulling together the ideas for what Leeds could look like in 50 years time, and also hopefully ideas that can pass elsewhere to say how can Leeds help other areas also improve their circular economy when it comes to clothing.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's from the RSA's perspective as well. What we're really excited about is how you can how the processes like this and learning from organisations like Zero Waste Leeds, because I think the other thing is that there isn't always an organisation like this, and you do such incredible work in the city, but actually kind of learning from what that can offer. And for the RSA, I guess our role is partly then saying, okay, if this is happening in places, what can we learn from that? What can other places learn from that? And particularly, what can authorities or governments or businesses learn from that as well, and start kind of connecting up these different levels. So the stuff that happens up at the kind of national government level is really connecting to what the needs are and what the opportunities and potential is in places like Leeds. So part of the work we're doing from this is to, as you say, sort of tell that story of like the potential is if we kind of look at cities and look at an area like Leeds and say, what could it offer? What can it offer? What is happening? And how could that contribute to a different future? Telling that story in order to kind of inspire other people, but also identifying where some of those challenges are that are maybe stopping the behaviour from happening. So we've seen, for example, in an issue like fashion, that although lots of different areas of the city council are really interested in this topic, actually at the moment it doesn't always fall within their remits to be able to really focus on it. So even though it's a massive problem in waste, because of the kind of metrics that the government kind of deliver for authorities to look at around waste, textiles is not necessarily the key one, even though actually it is really problematic. Similarly with climate change, again, it's a really important, really huge driver of climate change, but at the moment the focus is on other areas. So part of what we're doing is trying to say, like, actually at the moment this huge topic is falling between different people's remits, and we need a more holistic way of looking at it, and to kind of push government and policymakers to be thinking about that in a much more joined up way. So that's kind of the story we're trying to tell as well.
And we know that if there's any organisation that's amazing at doing that sort of thing, it's Zero Waste Leeds. So we know you'll take that forward. We're coming up towards the end of our time, just to say, so we have got things going on all week. Keep an eye out on Zero Waste Leeds social media. You can come with us on the Leeds Textile Trail, which is new, a collaboration with Leeds Civic Trust and Leeds Museums and Galleries. We're going to be in conversation with Councillor Denise Regan to find out the impact of textile waste on the city and how we can all play our part. I think is that tomorrow, Rob?
Yeah, that's tomorrow. Yeah. I mean, there's, as you said, there's quite a few things going. We'll put links to all of the events below this kind of post. But yeah, there's a mix of kind of conversations with different people, some of which you're hosting as well. And then, as you say, the kind of launch of the updated zero waste fashion map, which had been massively popular, but we've kind of improved it in terms of making it easier to use, so people can find charity shops and repairers and clothing exchanges when obviously when we can kind of get back to some kind of normality, if you like. But yeah, the textile trail is a really nice one. Just
you're talking Montague Birds this afternoon, aren't you, at 2 o'clock?
We've got, yeah, so I mean that's the next one today. We've got a chat with a couple of local historians, Jackie and Bob, who know all there is to know about Montague kind of Burton, and we'll be chatting to them about the kind of him coming to Leeds, early 1900s, and setting up what an enormous kind of factory in Hales. And again, I mean the timing with this, I mean the timing is quite sad, but it's quite it's very pertinent that I mean that factory is getting closed down, obviously because of the the Burton brand being sold, and that I think was a kind of an Arcadia kind of factory. But again, it makes it clear that now is a really good time to be talking about some of these things. What is the future of high street fashion and that kind of thing. So yeah, loads of conversations going on.
that factory effectively was where high street mass produced suits started.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible story in terms of, you know, and again, that we could probably have another half hour, couldn't we, on this theme, but about how, you know, it was almost like the fast fashion of its time. Do you know what I mean? But it was the way he ran his business, the way, you know, for the time, they were good jobs. You know, there were, as you say, 10,000 local people kind of working there, you know, and making good quality clothes, but making them so they were more affordable for you know, for more people. Is a really good, again, is a good starting point for a conversation about saying, well, how can we do that now, but do that in ways that doesn't have all the negative kind of environmental impacts, doesn't have the negative impacts in terms of you know, kind of in terms of people's livelihoods, but then also, you know, how can you know, we had a chat last week with Community Clothing and Jenny from Community Clothing. What can we do in this country to you know, have more clothing manufacture that gives more people better jobs? You know, it is possible, but we've got to kind of really, you know, kind of work at it, I think.
Yeah, and then on Thursday, as we were saying, we're going to be launching the new Sustainable Fashion and Textiles map, and we've got a Q&A on Thursday, 7 o'clock, where there's basically all the kind of big main sewers in Leeds, all the people who are doing, are going to be there. So people will literally be clackety clack, knitting, sewing, going like this, trying to thread needles and doing everything else that they need to do, and there'll be people they can actually directly ask.
Yeah, so if people are wanting to get into doing a bit of sewing and repairing, that is a really good chance to ask them questions.
Yeah, actually, and just talk and just gossip and talk and stuff. We're doing it on that's 7 o'clock on Thursday. So all the events and everything's on the Zero Waste Facebook page. Keep an eye out. Nat and Josie from the RSA, thank you so much for joining us, because we know you have a very busy day today. Thanks, Rob and the team at Zero Waste Leeds, for everything that you're doing. Greg. Thanks for people watching, and let's hopefully see you at our next thing and have fun this afternoon with Montague Burton.
Will do. Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for watching. Cheers. See you. Bye.
Bye.